Welcome back to our Scala Spark class. On day 31 we will look at reading data from various data sources into our Spark engine. So Spark has supports multiple data sources, so that's one of the strengths of Spark. So there are we will look at the core data sources, meaning the most important ones, which will be CSVs, JSON, Parquet, ORC, and JDBC, which is of course has to do with databases, regular SQL databases, and also last but not least, plain text, right? Just regular text files. However, that's not the end of it, right? We have support in Spark, supports Cassandra, MongoDB, XML, some other Amazon, Redshift, and so many other data sources. Like I said, it's literally hundreds of different ones. Of course, usually those will require, adding to your build SBT file, adding a library to read maybe some extra, these extra new more rare sources. So we will look at the basic ones. So we actually been using CSV, right? So we'll get started with that actually, right? So again, just give you the basic ideas, right? So how does it work? Well, we have a format, right? Basically, the structure of how this works. Options, right? Key option, name of the option, and what kind of option you want, what's the value of this option, right? You might also pass a schema, right? So by the way, by default Spark will use Parquet, like the covering, floor covering, right? Options are for different ways of extra options, and schema of course is for those cases when you have a problem with schema inference, right? So again, let's try to be, so there's some shorthand operations as well, right? So we start with read, right? We have a reader, right? Spark read, right? We get the data from reader using the Spark read, and then we have an option, format, schema, read mode, and then lots of options depending on the type of data of your data file you want to read, or multiple files of course you want to read. So again, we already have looked, we already have our date or utilities, Spark utilities. We are already using something like this, read data with you. We're using Spark, read, format, source. We have options, right? So this is not exactly new, right? So we have a schema option right here, how to deal with the schema on the header again. So this function which I wrote is not going to be universal enough for all the formats. It will work with CSV, it might work with some other formats, but not with everything. So we will do it by hand, and of course you are free to make your own functions as needed to make your life easier. Okay, so that's the format. So read, format, option, right? You have some extra options here. Mode, where do you want to, what are you reading, right? Option. Source, format source, well, that's the type of source, is CSV. File path is load here actually, right? You can also do option path, right? So this is another way of doing it, right? So you, instead of using it here, I'm using load file path, right? Here you could do it also, other way you could do it is by passing path option, saying, okay, this is where my file or multiple files do live. Okay. So yes, so that's the overall layout. Again, it's not nothing too complicated, right? So of course the complexity comes when you have many different options, right? So of course why is it so complex? Because data can be complex, right? So we'll use the simple ones as possible, right? There's some other ways of doing option setups, right? But we'll do the simple option. I like this approach because it lets you comment out. If you have a single line, you just basically comment out the line basically, or delete it, basically add a new option, right? It's I think it's quite readable, right? You could make it more complex and try to pass multiple options on the same at the same time. Okay, so we have for example, there's Spark reading modes, right? There's permissive, right? Which basically says if it doesn't recognize something, it will say, okay, it's null, right? All right, and corrupted records will be a string column called corrupt record. Drop malformed, it just drops the rows which have some bad values. Or you have the fail fast, which fails immediately upon encountering malformed records, right? So these are the three modes, right? So the default is permissive. Okay, and writing is very similar. Of course, just going the other way. right? So format by default, okay, here's a typo, Parquet format, right, in the book, right? So this is on and then of course you have partition by, bucket by, sort by only, right? So you can say how do you want to partition your data, right? Because as you'll see, sometimes Parquet Parquet, I mean Spark likes to save file in multiple partitions, right? You can do it in one partition. So right, so again, so you have date frame right, and the format where to go, right? So something like this. CSV mode overwrite. So what does it mean overwrite? This means you are overwriting previous file. You can have option for date formatting, for example, if you want to use this format. Just one of the many options you can use. So very, again, similar. Notice these are the important one, mode option, right? So overwrite, right? Append, which means adds things at the end. Error, if it exists. So basically you don't do it anything, or if file exists already, do nothing, right? So meaning it don't write anything onto overwrite. Don't overwrite, but just ignore it without silently. So I think this is, in a way, this is kind of dangerous, right? Because you don't know what happened, if anything went wrong, right? If error exists, I think it's better if you don't want to overwrite, right? Because then okay, you'll have an exception and you will see if something went wrong. Override, of course, is what they usually use, of course, assuming the file, the name is something you want to overwrite, you basically use overwrite option. Of course, append is for things like logs or for some extra messages where you just keep adding things at the end of the file, right? So error if exists, actually will throw the error, right? So overwrite is what I will use it quite a bit. So right, so we start with our CSVs, right? So again, these things we have been working for a couple months already, and they are, like I said, this book author agrees with me that they are one of the trickiest formats because there are no real structured assumptions, right? They could have anything, right? So that's why CSV Reader has, I think, the most options, right? So you can work around things like needing to escape files. Maybe there's commas, maybe inside the columns, things like that. Maybe what do is null values, right? So that is what we're gonna be checking out first. Okay, so Scala. I'll start a new file, new Scala class, object, day 31, reading data, right? Okay, extends app, all right, and of course print line, chapter 9, data sources, reading, writing, right? And so of course, while Spark is get Sparky, of course, get Spark, my friend Sparky, and we are going to be in business, right? Okay, so I assume this works, of course, and while it's working, let's check so I will add this. So I'll add also options. So these are, again, of course, you can read this, look up this definition for CSV. Maybe it has a link, right? So CSV data source options, right? CSV Reader, maybe we'll look here, Spark, CSV Reader options. Maybe we want official documentation, not of the blogs or anything like that. Yeah, so CSV files, you would want to look at this documentation, which would be completely fine, right? So this actually shows you different codes, right? So lots of options are here, right? So again, don't have to copy the whole book here. You can look up the documentation yourself, right? So these are different options for CSV Reader, right? Again, that's something might be quite useful, right? So so CSV stands for comma values, of course, and so again, we already been using them, right? So quite successfully, right? So nothing too much to worry about. And let's see, we have maybe, right, so you did the reader, right? So Spark read format, right? Header, right? And notice again, so you can pass option here, right? So fail fast, for example, we'll do header true, right? And some file, right? So that's one way of doing it, right? So read format CSV is is the beginning, right? And then we have option header true, mode fail fast. And so the mode is basically how much tolerance we have for bad or malformed data, right? So again, we can do a schema by hand, of course. Again, this is nothing we have done before, right? So okay, so this would be something we could do it. We already did this before, right? So this is just a recap already, right? So I will do this, my manual schema, right? So this would be if I want to do this, right? So, right. So again, this would be load, and again you can load like this, or you can use using path. So here we'll use a schema, right? Nothing to something we did already before, right? So, right. Of course, I need to import all these goodies, struct type, struct field, right? This is for those cases when you are not sure if, okay, I need a struct type and I have to do it by hand apparently. Struct type on string type, sorry, string type and long type, right? Okay, so you did this before exercise, so I'm not gonna bore you with this, but again, we read and we can show, right? And of course here it will work. Why it will work? Because we have the schema, right? Manually, right? We're gonna see if we're gonna file fast, if we have bad data. So fail on malformed data, not matching our schema, right? For one, right? So on load, of course, we don't have data here. Where do we have data? We have in flight data, which of course is CSV 2000, right? So here, right? We want this one, for example, right? So let's get our copy path reference. Of course, it's going to be path from content root or repository root, and I will add it here, right? So again, pretty simple stuff, right? Of course, again, so here we have our data frame here, right, at this point, right? And of course, then you can save it if you want. Instead of showing, you could save it, right? Again, or fail. Of course, we could have an exception. Of course, that's okay. So let's do this again. This is something we've done already a couple times. Will we fail? Let's see. Will we maybe have some problems? Maybe the file type, the destination, count again. We'll see if it doesn't like this schema. We'll see. I think it works fine. Again, I have not tested this completely, so let's see if this works. Do we have it? Yes, we do. Everything worked. Code 0. Okay, great. All right, so that's fine. All right, so things get tricky, but it comes right. So, right, all column types. Right. So if you do this, right. Right. If you do some crazy my manual schema, my bad schema, right. So I want all longs, right, which of course is silly, right. So fail fast, right. 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 Remember, so right. So things get tricky. So that's of course it's just bad schema. I hope you can see this. This is bad schema. I'm not going to show you. It's going to be a failure, right? So basically, it will fail, right? Right. So in general, right. So we can't see. So basically, if we do something completely, I mean, it's impossible to do long from destination country name, right? You can't really turn in a square peg into round peg. You can't turn it, right? Okay, but how about the saving fail data, right? So there will be a slightly surprising thing about saving data, right? So many, of course, max columns in first schema won't apply because we already have a schema, right? So we have read, right? Let's save it, right? We have I'm going to save it here, right? So instead of showing it, right, I will say my val CSV df, right? I'll say something like this, right? And we can of course show right now CSV df, right? Show, right? And of course but how to save it? All right, so we'll do overwrite, and we want a TSV file, right? So right, so we can option load, right? So we can save it like this. But TSV stands for what? Stands for tab separated values. So just like comma separated values. So like this, right? So let's try it. So again, of course, technically they're both CSVs, but of course, well, no, they are very similar, extremely similar. So where will I save it? Well, first of all, do I have any folder? Well, if I do this, it's not a great place to put stuff, right? Because I'll do this here, right? So source resource temporary, right? So something like this, right? So here. Well, the thing is, I think it will be a problem because we don't have a subdirectory temp, right? I have it here, right? Resources, what do I have? I have CSV, flight data regression, and retail data. Actually, I added some new data sources here, but I don't have a temporary, right? Again, of course, has no particular meaning. It's just something to use, right? So option, again, option TSV, mode, right? Again, I like to make it more readable. You could do, of course, like this, right? Even like this, right? Because you could change. So overwrite, right? This is what I usually use as well to overwrite existing file. Again, assuming all the risks what comes with that. And let's see what happens now. And let's see if it will. I think it will be an exception because I don't have a file folder, right? You could do you could of course use your regular Scala code to create a map. A folder using temp, right? I think I'll just skip it here and I'll just make it by hand. No failure, right? Actually, right. So notice, so actually, yeah, right. So Spark will create needed temp name folders, right? If they do not exist, right? That's kind of cool, actually, right? We don't have to do any extra code like doing Scala. Like remember we did our exercise a long time ago. You could write file, but you don't have to do it because Scala, Spark already has written code in Scala to do this for you, right? So you don't have to do any. So it created temp folder. Okay, that's great. So what's inside? Well, and here's your surprise. So to say, well, yes, it actually, the name of the file, it won't save the file. This is how Spark works with many different file types. It will call it a directory. It will create another directory called the actual file name. But inside, it will have something called a cyclical redundancy check. It's basically a checksum, basically like a, you can think of this like signature, basically saying, okay, this is what should be results. Let's see this here. Text file. Let's open up. Oh, actually, that's actually not a text file. It's actually a binary file. It's a small, tiny file. It's like a signature, right? Like we use our digital signatures. And basically, success message. So these are like sort of extra things. But what we want, the data is here, right? So notice it also has part 000. Why is that the case? Because Spark will try to partition your data into multiple files if you don't tell it otherwise. However, in this case, we had a very small, I think, file. I think we had, let's see, svdf describe. It was not very big, right? Right, so we'll check, but basically it will look like this. Right, okay, by the way, notice something else. We don't save a tab, right? We didn't say, we have no header here, right? We have United States, Romania 1. We skipped header. So this is something maybe we'll want to add header. So yeah, so this is the actual CSV file we saved. Now the question is, how do you get that file name into something more human, right? You maybe want to have this file name, right? Well, you could write your own program for this, right? Because you could look at the files inside, right? But basically, this is how Spark handles this. It's very robust. I mean, it's very, to say maybe it's an overkill for CSV files, right? But basically, it describes the file, right? Again, and also mentions what part of it is, and so it sits underneath this CSV file. So what's the reason for this? Why is this format used like this? Because you might have a multiple file, have a huge data set. It won't be feasible to have it all on one file, right? So unfortunately, well, at least up to version 3.1, there was no way of changing it to basically save just a single file. I don't think there's such option still. I don't think it's still present. We will check, right? But it's not present. Okay, so one thing, maybe one do have a header still. Do we have a header option? Yes. So, right. So this reflects, right, it's actually a folder with numerous files within, right? And you'll see that it's actually right. So this is trade-off basically. Okay, I think we can do header, right? I'll see the option for saving files. CC files. We want to save files. Read, right? Header true. We want header true, right? Let's see. Saving files. That is a load save, right? Let's see. Generic load save functions. What do we want? Option to save. Save modes. Okay, save modes. Saving percent tables. Sorting, right? Options. We can also partitioning options, right? And I don't think there was an option. Generic files options. Right. I think it is actually read. Do they have option to save? They don't official documentation. Okay. To CSV, right? To we can see quote. Okay, I think header true. I think we can use option header true. I think it will work. Let's try it. Right, so option separator, that's fine. Option. So basically header, right, true. And of course it's up to us to make sure this option exists, right? So again, this should exist, right? So we want to preserve headers, right? Right. Okay, let's see this. I think this works, but let's try it. So, and I wonder if the checksum will be different. I think it will be different, right? It should overwrite. Yeah, overwrite, right? Okay, it looks like it worked. Okay, let's take our data source. Yep, it worked. See, destination country name, this origin country name, and count. So yeah, so this will be probably quite a common option to use. The only question now is the tab, right? Again, it should probably, there's an option which might be very important, is escaping. Yes. So do you want escape quotes, right? Escape quotes, right? So a flag, right? So do you add quotes? Escaping, right? Use what kind of escape character will be used, right? For example, you have quotes, right? And you want to escape them, right? So what kind of use, right? Maybe also, so you could do quote all. You could do this, by the way, right? You can see what the quote is. You can change it, right? Encoding is default USV, right? So basically, for reading, this is usually UTF-8. Default is UTF-8, right? So you might, if you have some older data source, or maybe some rare, maybe from Baltics or from 90s or some older data source, you might want to change the encoding, of course. Again, so this is lots of options here, right? Again, could get quite messy, right? Till you figure out the right option sometimes, right? Again, it gives you the most pain when you dealing with CSV data. Okay. So let's see how much time we have, and I want to continue, get through through JSON files, and then get to Parquet files, right? Which are, I think, kind of cool. I like Parquet, but okay. So JSON, of course, is so what's the catch, right? So the catch is so here's the difference. The main difference is, I mentioned this before, that CSV in Spark world is not actually regular JSON, but it's actually line delimited JSON files, right? We'll see what it means is that, let's see what we're gonna look, what kind of data we're gonna read here, right? We're gonna read from summary. Again, yeah, we got to look at summary. Was it flight data, right? And we saw this JSON, right? So summary, right? So this is basically technically not JSON because it's actually each line is a valid JSON, but not so. If I delete all the lines but kept one, then it would be a valid JSON file, right? So it's called multi-line JSON. Again, the reason for that is why this format is used by Spark, because this is much easier to add extra lines by using append. You have a big file, you need to add more records. You don't have to delete the first. Otherwise, you have to have a what you call. You need to be a proper JSON file, right? You have to add a bracket here, square bracket here, you have to have a bracket here, right? And then have comma at the end of each line, right? And that's a regular JSON basically. And actually, of course, that basically would read as well, right? But this is what Spark will expect usually, right? So again, notice how it works. So it's basically each record, right? So each row is presented as one JSON, valid JSON here, basically. Okay, so that's why it's slightly different. Again, so you might need to keep that in mind if you're dealing with regular JSON files. So, but basically, yes, so it's very simple, right? So we will see, of course, just the regular JSON, right? And so I did add this. And again, right. Yes, right. So it's stable, because that's a reason, right? So have at least basic types, right? So this is good news for you because there's less options than in CSV because you have less problems. If it's valid JSON or multi-line JSON, depending what you have, right? So there's an option. You can have you have option multi-line. By default it is true. So let's look at our Spark CSV files. Look at JSON files, right? Here, right? So again, it's not a typical, right? Separate, right? So you can do this. You can set if you have a regular JSON file, you say multi-line option basically, right? It's true basically, right? So okay, and so we will add this. I'll add this help here for you, and we will proceed. We will proceed. JSON, right? And now what do we have? So timestamps. We have some extra options here. Of course, again, look up the latest one, and of course this will be, we'll use all this, right? And again, I'll call it JSON df, right? Well, JSON df, of course it's just a regular JSON, of course, means regular data frame, of course, right? So Spark, right? And here, right? Okay, so read formats JSON, option mode fail fast, schema. Right, so I am actually saying, okay, this is my schema, of course, optional, and of course, load is gonna be this one here, right? Except, of course, I'll change the CSV to JSON. The subfolder, of course, is well, yeah, it's basically, so I need to change two things, right? JSON, of course, right? And of course this is JSON as well, right? Okay, and of course this is, since I'm showing this here, so I need JSON df, right? Okay, and maybe JSON describe as well, right? Yeah, oh, JSON df, or from JSON df. Of course it should be very similar. Okay, let's run it. And again, option. Of course these are all optional. Of course this is also optional. So fail on error instead of making null values, right? So again, up to you what you need, right? It might be something useful to have it like this. Let's see. So I think it's quite easy to follow. I like this way of setting options separately. Right, are we still reading? Yes, we wrote, we read. Right, so again, very similar, right? Did they have a right. This is just a data frames show, right? Yeah, so I need to show, of course. Sorry about that. This doesn't show you any stats, right? If you want stats, this is going to be a show, of course, right? Okay, yeah, for show stats. Okay, and well, now how do we save it, right? It's just as simple as reading them, right? And in fact, we will use this CSV. I could use, of course, this JSON df, but we can use any data frame, right? It doesn't matter where it came from, right? It just comes, we use it, and we save it. We have our own persistence, right? We save our local copy, something like this, right? So again, let's take a look. And as you can expect, you will see that this also again is going to be in multiple parts, right? So of course I don't have CSV file, I have CSV df, right? Okay. What do I need? I need, how do I save it? Yeah, okay. I'll call it like here, right? So not do I need options? Do I need a schema? Not really. Do I need headers? Let's see what happens here. So of course I need to change the name, right? No, I don't copy this. I don't need to escape this, right? But it's gonna be JSON, my JSON file. You know, something like. Of course, it's gonna be a folder. Okay, so I'll leave it in temporary. Okay, mode override JSON, and let's see what it looks like, right? And I will I'll do collect maybe. Can I do collect? Can I just write maybe 5? Let's try this. Maybe I don't want everything. I could do select, maybe I could do limit maybe 10, right? That would be also a possibility, right? So I would like something like maybe I want maybe write only the first I don't know 10 rows, right? Or 50 rows, right? Collect would be one way of doing it, but it actually won't give you if I did collect here, right? Collect 10, right? This won't work, I don't think, right? Collect right, and actually it's not what we want, I guess, right? So we want probably just select, we could do, of course, I mean, I could do something silly like this, right? Select expression, right? And, you know, well, but then I heard select all, limit 10, right? Will this work, actually? Limit 10. Let's see what happens. Can I do this? I'm just curious, right? Let's see if this works, right? I'm just curious if this will work, right? It might, right? Because I don't have a data, I don't have a view, right? I have not set a view for this. Will this work without data, without the actual limit? Let's see, right? It might work, it might not, right? So I will save it, but it should be quite easy to see if this works. Okay, didn't work because our select expression didn't work, right? Limit, right? Didn't work actually, or limit. How was it again? Again, this is not part of this. How did we limit this, right? We could do, of course, limit 10 from data. Without, could we do? I think there was a function, right, to limit. Have a data frame with because show. We don't want to show, right? We want to actually. Right, get some data, basically, or functions, right? Limit, select, right? Limit here, yeah, there we go, right? Limit, yeah, it's limit. Okay, you could do this basically, right? That's right. So, you know, top 10, of course, we could do this here basically. I don't know how to do this. I can just do basically limit 10, right? That would also work, right? Okay, because again, so we have just top 10 rows of our current data frame, and maybe I want to order by first, right? Maybe order by, of course, order by, maybe order by, what was it? Flights, count, order by count, right? And I want descending, of course, right? And I want descending, right? Yeah, and of course this is not part of this import. Yeah, this is what we want. Okay, let's see how it works. So top 10 flights, number, count, right? And you know, we could do also order by country and so on. Okay, let's see what happens, right? Ordered by descending by count. Okay, right? So again, these, of course, why does this work? Because again, this is a data frame, right? Data set of T, and this also should be a data frame, basically, right? Data set T, but it should work, right? Again, because of course it is just a data frame. Okay, let's take a look. Will it work? So you basically get something, either a data set of T or a data frame, and you can start doing writing, saving your results basically. Again, so write will force, of course, actual action, right? Collect, because until you do, let's see if this works, of course. Oh yeah, it works fine, but let's see if we have data. Where do we have our data? We have temporary, and we have my JSON file, and it should be very tiny. It should be very tiny. It should be a very tiny file, and indeed it has the most. Remember, we had our big number of flights, and it is actually shows, right, our top 10 list basically. Again, there's no need for header, of course, because the header column information is embedded inside the column names. Okay, that's great, and now we can probably move on to Parquet. Now that we have seen how saving and loading and saving data in CSV and JSON formats works, let's take a look at the default option. Actually, it turns out the default is Parquet. Right, so what in the world is Parquet? Right, it's actually called Parquet, Apache Parquet, so it's a big project, right? It's an open source column-oriented data file format for efficient data storage. So keyword being efficient, right? So basically, think of it as a zipped CSV file with strong schema, right? And right, so it's actually, I think it's compressed by columns, actually. Very interesting way, right? It is actually quite fast to load, right? Libraries to work with Parquet are available in many languages. Of course, Spark supports it as well. Right, so quite a nice format. So I used in different type of projects. Again, so the only downside is that it is binary. So what does it mean? Binary, of course, since you're zipping, you're compressing data, it's not humanly readable, right? You can't just edit a Parquet format unless you are really, I don't know, Stephen Hawking or somebody, but you have to process, unzip the data on the fly in your head, which is probably not something you could do, and not something you should even attempt. It's not for us, it's for the computers, basically. So, okay, so let's take a look what our documentation says, right? So, right, and, but yeah, one thing we didn't do is, all right, limit and repetition, right? We didn't, so yeah, Parquet, right? So, Parquet format, right? So columnar compression, like I said, yeah, column compression, right? So fast reading of individual columns instead of entire files, right? It's again, so it's very well suited for Apache Spark, Apache Parquet or Parquet. I don't know how you say it in French. Parquet, right? Parquets in Latvian, right? So it's a great format for long-term storage, right? So it will be more efficient, right? Again, for example, usually if I have, let's say I have a terabyte of CSV file, it will be only maybe 100 gigabytes, maybe less in Parquet, so about maybe 1 to 10 compression. It's not rare, actually, not usually 1 to 8 or 1 to 6 compression compared to regular CSV or JSON is good. So complex types, right? So if you have also another mention is if your data is columnar data, right, you will still be able to save it, right? So basically read, right? In fact, I think you can skip this, right? Because it's actually default, right? So again, very few options. You just say, okay, I want to use this and I am good, right? So, we can set schema if we have strict requirements, but usually, basically, we can infer schema, of course, right? Because, of course, the schema is inside the file. So we don't have to infer the schema, right, actually, right? So, okay, so let's load our Parquet, right? Let's look at that. So let me save this data, right? And we will see what is going on. Actually, I have it already prepared for you. Data you want Parquet, right, already, but there was something interesting, right? So there was something interesting in the way it works, right? So reading Parquet, very few options, right? So now let's take a look what it says, right? So I'm reading the 2000 summary Parquet, okay? And I will actually, you will see what's going on underneath. I'm going to use this one, right? Okay. And I will not do anything else. I'm not going to write. I'm just going to load, right? df and df show, right? Okay. And also I could do, of course, df describe show 5 maybe, right? 5, right? And df describe show, right? Okay. And show, right? Okay. Now, what do I get? We'll see. So I can tell you this is not going to be, you'll see a big wall of text, right? So the first attempt will not be pretty, right? So we'll run, of course, Spark on. So otherwise pretty simple, right? Nothing too complex, but and we will see how it works. Yes, so it worked. I got the data. Look at this. I got my description, right? I got my data, right? I got my schema. I could do, of course, schema, right? I have some statistics and all that good stuff. Show print schema, of course. Maybe, right? And df print schema, right? Okay, it also works, right? Okay, it all works, but there's a problem. Well, it's not a big problem, but there is something. There is a warning, ignoring statistics because created by. There is something is not quite right on what's the story. Again, this book was written 4 years ago with an older, so the data source is older version of Parquet. Of course, this is one of those dangers, right? So there's a warning if you do in Stack Overflow search, right? So basically, older Parquet files from created through Spark 1.6, right? Older version of Spark, and we have, of course, 3.3 Spark, right? So that's where you get the warnings. So what do I do? Basically, you could, of course, check the logger properties. That's one thing, right? If you encounter, you could, again, it's a warning, right? It still reads just fine. So what I did do, right? I loaded it, right? I actually save it, right? And then we should have no problems, right? So I will simply write it here using mode override. Again, so this goes very well with our next. So mode override, save, right? Summary fixed. And again, there's nothing, if you have our flight data, right? Flight data, right? Parquet, right? So here, again, nothing too complex. Again, you see that it's actually, there's some slight difference. Notice how it is. It looks like this was actually using GZ. And this has snappy, so there's change. So we will be using, or so this will, so we will save using our current Parquet standard, right? We'll read from old one, we read from the old one with some warnings, right? And we save in a good one. Okay, so this is again something you might encounter in the wild. Again, only two options. Write, read, write, so basically write. Okay, so we will, that's where we're gonna stop, but let's see what's gonna happen here. Okay, so I'm gonna read it with warnings and I'll save it here. Okay, let's see. And maybe I will do this, okay, I'll say, what were the options? Remember our options, or general Scala options, right? Generic file source options was, what was option mode, right? Mode. Also, by the way, okay, right? Notice something else, right? This is we used it in day 3.1. We used also mode actually, right? But I think option mode also would work, right? I think also would work, right? So this is same thing as, again, if you forget there's such thing as mode, right? Yeah, actually, but this is nicer, of course, because you see the help, right? So we want what? Ignore or error, right? Or just basic override. That's what I use, right? So again, you can change. This is easier. We could use, of course, option mode, but it will not provide as much support, right? We could use, of course, we could use option mode override, right? But harder, to debug, right? But this would also work, right? Typos here. This shows you, if you look at help, right? It tells you what you can use, right? Okay, so we'll stick with override, and we are going to override this all. So we read from the old format and we overwrite with the new format. Okay. So we'll see a warning. Yeah, it works. We save it, right? And we have it here in fixed, right? Again, new version, right? Again, it's different format. Again, if I click on this, right, it's not gonna be readable. Again, there's no point trying. Okay, and it's tiny. These are tiny files, right? So schema, we see that we have 255 entries, we have the count numbers, right? So we see the data, it works nicely. So okay, so next time if I do this, right, and I load the fixed version, right, we will not gonna encounter any errors, right? There should be no errors there, right? And let me not go, there's no point overwriting, right? I'm just gonna skip this part here. Okay, so let's load the correct version and see what's happening. Okay, right, so it works. There's no notice. So this time I use the fixed version, right? It did not encounter any warnings again, because of course we saved the newest version again. So of course this is a challenge in general working with data. In binary data, of course, the format, something, some specification changes, you are basically, well, you have to figure out what changed and basically what kind of options we can use. Okay, so now it's time for our exercise, and we'll do something simple. You are to read the Parquet file from source resources regression, right? It's in here. It's a new file here, right? And it's actually multiple part file, so this will be a challenge. I will see if this actually works. Again, you only have to do this, right? So then save it, right, to do read. If you see any, okay, on print schema, print sample of some rows, and show some statistics, show some basic statistics, you know, descriptive, describe, etc. Describe would be a good start, right? So that would be a basic one. So if you encounter also one more, if you encounter warnings reading data, then save into source resources regression fixed, right? Okay, something like that, right? So save Parquet again. So since this is bigger, do not begin. So these are again, remember how it works, that this actually have multiple files. That's fine. You don't have to read these. You don't need these names. That's fine. There's 8 parts here, right? You just basically say regression. It should work. So it's pretty simple, right? Except maybe there will be some problem with reading it, right? That's the only thing is. If you have a complete problem, right, you could of course read also fix. Do we have anything else? Let's see, org, JSON we have, no, nothing else. We'll also use database in a moment. We'll check that at 9 o'clock. We'll check that. Okay, so thing is, so 5 do's, but they're pretty relatively simple. Okay, so I'll see you at 9 and we'll discuss reading and writing other formats.